This is the second audio file of part 2 for week 5, and we're looking now at slide 12. Chongqing, which was also the name of a line of canned Chinese food in the US in the 1970s, with its own interesting advertising jingles. Chongqing is the way to pronounce Chongqing in decades past in English. Chongqing is now China's biggest city, and in the course of the retreat by the nationalists and the reconstruction of their capital into the wartime capital of Chongqing, it got on the road of becoming China's biggest city. So in Chongqing, there were a lot of problems. It was not a big place at the time. It was a very old city, and it lay in, as I think I mentioned, in China's rice basket. So it was self-sustaining in a sense. However, it was within the range of Japanese bombers. And at this time, American air power was not successfully deployed, which was in part because of the remoteness of the area, but also it was a strategic decision on the part of the Americans, because what they wanted to do, most of all, was to win the war. And they knew that winning the war meant being successful in the Pacific against the Japanese, and approaching the home islands so that Japan could be defeated there and the war could be brought to an end. So they did not deploy forces in China to the extent that Chiang Kai-shek wanted, and this was this one source of tension between the two sides. Another source was the increasing corruption on the nationalist side, something that came from long-standing influences that still can be observed in China today, where government officials are not paid very much, and they are expected, at least tacitly, to supplement their incomes using official influence. This went wild in Chongqing during this period, and part of it was Chiang Kai-shek's leadership style. He expected loyalty from his subordinates, but he was very loyal as well to his subordinates. And so he did not crack down on those who were loyal to him. He allowed them to pursue corrupt activity as long as they didn't embarrass him or mess everything up. And this is an important thing to keep in mind as you take a look at China today. This is what the Communist Party expects from its officials. As long as they are loyal, as long as they follow directions, and as long as they don't go nuts and become so corrupt that they cause embarrassment or turmoil, then they are allowed to pursue corrupt means to enrich themselves. This is, unfortunately, a very Chinese aspect of government, which I don't know if it will ever be overcome. Anyway, the corruption of the nationalist forces was another element of discord between the Americans and the Chinese. And the officer pictured here on the right, Joseph Stilwell, a Chinese speaker, a brilliant tactician, and a very good strategic leader, was not a politician. The first man I had as a teacher of things Chinese was named Richard Corsa. He was on Stilwell's staff during the war in Chongqing, and he once described Stilwell to me as being a very nasty and obscene man. not to speak against Stilwell, because he was a very effective figure in his realm. His nickname was Vinegar Joe Stilwell, for a good reason. He had a sharp tongue, which became very profane at the drop of a hat. I can sympathize with that. And he was no politician. He was eventually relieved because Chiang Kai-shek insisted that he leave, and was replaced by another officer. And part of the reason he was able to do this was that he threatened the Allies with going over to the Japanese side if they didn't do more for him, and this worked to some extent, but not always. The Americans were growing weary of him by 1944, and again, their primary motivation was to win the war as quickly as possible. Chiang Kai-shek's motivation was not, to be frank, to win the war as quickly as possible. His motivation was to survive after having been thoroughly bloodied, as we spoke of a little while ago, in the initial fight against the Japanese, and feeling justifiably so that his forces had borne the brunt of the casualties against the Japanese. He wanted to preserve his best units for the upcoming fight that he knew was coming against the communists. The Americans, however, wanted to speed the end of the war, and one reason that they, one method that they thought of was to improve relations with the communists, obtain intelligence from them, obtain liaison help, and open up another front against the Japanese. This was always an illusion. It never would have happened. Mao Zedong was not in the mood to increase his operations against the Japanese because his forces had been bloodied when they tried to do that. They attacked the Japanese in the 100 Regiments campaign of 1941, and the retaliation against them was so severe and the losses so heavy that they never did that again. Instead, they took the same tact as did Chiang Kai-shek. They tried to preserve their forces for the fight that they knew was coming at the end of the war. Let's go on to slide 13. So the guerrilla operations of the two sides, the Chinese communists and the Chinese nationalists, were quite different. To make a long story short, the KMT special operations were like something out of a Chuck Norris movie, or they were like something out of British Special Operations Executive or the U.S. Office of Strategic Services. They were elite units that went in, hit hard, and got out, and they didn't fool around with the population. The communist guerrillas, on the other hand, were more numerous, less elite. More of them were regular troops, and their operations aimed to integrate themselves into the population and use the population as intelligence resources and logistical resources. A good example of this is the East River Column, as they were called, in the Hong Kong area. There's a very good book about them by a man named Chan, I think it is, C-H-A-N, East River Column, that's the name of the book. And their operations in Hong Kong were highly successful. Let's go on to slide 14. In the meantime, back in Yunnan, in the period right after the beginning of the anti-Japanese war, there was a large influx of people, especially young people from the cities, who traveled to Yunnan to join into the good fight against Japan, which caused the membership of the Communist Party to balloon during this period. However, this began to raise alarm bells. I won't say red flags, because it's a good thing if you're a Chinese communist, but raised alarm bells on the communist side, because they had been through a long period of a war full of betrayal with the nationalists in the late 20s and early 30s, and were sensitive to being infiltrated, and their leadership began to consider this rapid influx of members from the cities to be dangerous, to be potentially hazardous in the form of infiltration by the nationalist side. And so began a period of cadre examination, which led to a series of campaigns in mid-1943. They were separate, but they were related to each other. A series of campaigns that led to 1943, a period when they went nuts, where paranoia completely took over, and people were, in an almost religious fashion, forced to confess their sins. Mao Zedong used this. He was not mad by any stretch of the imagination. Neither was his intelligence chief, Kang Sheng, who has a bad name in China today. He was actually excommunicated, or rather expelled, from the Communist Party a year after his death in 1975. Actually 2 years after his death. Once Mao had died, Kang Sheng was an easy target and was extremely unpopular and hated throughout the Communist Party for his cruelty. He was, as one writer once put it, the claws of the dragon. So Mao used Kang Sheng to instigate these campaigns and to use them to attack the pro-Russians who were at the center of the Communist Party leadership. And at one point this caused, as I mentioned before, one of them named Bogu, B-O-G-U, Bogu, to actually become an agent of the Russians at the time, to giving inside information about what was going on. And that led to increased reporting back to Moscow, basically saying things are going to hell out here, something's got to be done. And Stalin approved a telegram to Mao Zedong from his assistant for East Asia, Georgy Dimitrov, that laid down the law, basically telling Mao to stop persecuting his comrades and get rid of that bully boy Kang Sheng, and let's get your act together and defeat the Japanese. So meanwhile, in Japan, there were some similar things going on. They were by no means the same, but there were some elements of similarity in the way the Japanese turned on each other and pursued a militant and radical course. We've mentioned previously that I said one prime minister was assassinated in the last lecture, but it was actually two that were assassinated in the early 1930s. In the lead up to the control faction's rise to power, the control faction, again, were the army officers who wanted to do two things. One was to pursue a more militant and immediate military solution to all of Japan's problems in East Asia, and the other was to change the economy toward a complete war footing, militarizing the economy. And so once they did manage to take over, two things stopped. One was terror against the government, because now the terrorists were in charge, and the other was rogue military actions in China designed to force the government to confront the Chinese government more directly, because now those people were in charge. And so there was this increase in military spending, which really took off after 1937 with the military takeover of the government, and Tojo Hideki was appointed prime minister. Now I'm pretty sure I lost the previous audio too. I'm doing it for a second time here, and I'm pretty sure that this is where I stopped. So here we are, and please go on to audio 3 and slide 16.